the Spirits Podcast, a boozy dive into mythology, legends, and folklore. Every week we pour a drink and learn about a new story from around the world. I'm Amanda.
And I'm Julia. And Amanda, we mentioned in a recent episode with our guest, Mel Gilman, I was talking about my pandemic hobby that was foraging.
Yes, you really got the foraging and mushrooms as your personality bug for a little while. And I'm happy to see that it stuck around because I think it's a wonderful hobby.
Yeah. You know what? It's one of those things where I was like, I was out there doing my thing. I'm not like leading expeditions. My knowledge is very like theoretical and not practical. I'm not out there really like eating a lot of the stuff that I find. In general, just I think that can be, if you're not very, very well trained, very dangerous. And we'll talk a little bit about that probably in this episode. But one of the specific things that I really did enjoy about like mushroom foraging and identification was like, there are so many different types of mushrooms and so many different like looks and feels and vibes of mushrooms. And admittedly, Long Island, not a super diverse mushroom kind of area. It's not as diverse as, like, say, the Catskills are or the Pacific Northwest. In case you don't know, mushrooms like high altitude for the most part and also like very moist weather. Not so much a thing on Long Island.
No, we're pretty much at sea level. And while it can be moist, the moisture is filled with salt, which I hear is not great for all living things.
Yes, that is true. And there are some that like kind of sandier conditions. There are some that like saltier conditions, as is the way of like just, you know, evolution and the way that plants evolved.
Yes.
But I think mushrooms are really cool. I think they're pretty neat. And that is why, Amanda, I want to, for this entire month, talk about mushrooms.
Whoa, mushroom month. Love it.
So we are going to start Mushroom Month with a roundup of mushroom folklore from around the world.
Hell yeah.
And in doing this research, it was really interesting to me because, as I mentioned to you, Amanda, before the call, I was like, you know what? I would have thought there were like mushroom creatures in a lot of folklore. I would have assumed, if you asked me, Julia, is there a mushroom yokai? I would have been like, yes, of course there's a mushroom yokai. There's not a ton of like mushroom creatures, especially like we look at like modern day horror. We look at modern day kind of like pop culture and stuff like that. There's a lot of like guy who is also a mushroom.
Yeah. And I feel like superhero narratives as well with their origins of supernatural abilities. I feel like I've seen lots of like body horror of a mushroom genre in like superhero, in horror, you know, tales and in all kinds of video games.
Yes. And you know what? In doing the research for this episode, you see a lot of those, but you don't see exactly like the origins of those. So mushrooms and their existence specifically in folklore and mythology is kind of like fairly limited in a way. But we're going to talk more about like mushroom modern monsters later on in this month, maybe with a special guest who can say.
Who can say?
But in the meantime, Amanda, I want to talk to you about the nitty-gritty of mushroom folklore and kind of what they are associated with and what creatures they're associated with. Even if we don't have mushroom monsters, we do have creatures that were associated with mushrooms.
Love it. When I think mushrooms, I think fairy gardens, I think healing, I think tea. And so all of those things, especially like women's work and folk remedies, are going to be mushroom heavy. So I'm excited to learn.
Well, Amanda, you talk about fairies right off the bat. How about the fairy ring?
Oh, of course. And hey, Julia, I bet some mushrooms grow in rings naturally, don't they?
Well, okay, so here's the thing. If you spend any time outside, you probably have at least seen or heard of a fairy ring. This is a group of mushrooms that naturally forms either a ring or an arc. Now, this is seen as a kind of supernatural occurrence in a lot of folklore. And the assumption is kind of like, if you cross the fairy ring, something will happen to you, whether it's positive or negative, depends on the tradition. And there are various traditions because fairy rings are a natural occurrence that can happen pretty much anywhere that mushrooms grow. Now, I will get into the folklore in a second, but you're probably, maybe, asking, how does this kind of perfect circle of mushrooms or a perfect arc of mushrooms happen? Maybe you're a big nerd like me and you already know about this, but maybe you don't.
Let's just say for argument's sake, I don't, Julia. Like, not for me, but for the listeners. Like, what would you say?
Well, Amanda, why don't we head into a little mycology corner? All right, Amanda, here we are in Mythology Corner. So what you need to know about mushrooms is that mushrooms grow through a sort of root system that is called the mycelium.
Yes, that's a word I have heard associated with mushrooms, mycelium.
So basically, the mycelium absorbs nutrients in the ground around the mushroom. It breaks down different soils and stuff as they feed. Now, this mycelium grows outward from a center point until the nutrients in the center are all exhausted, at which point the center point dies, which creates a ring, and then from the ring, the mushroom spores sprout, which creates this circle of mushrooms surrounding this middle point.
I see. So if the nutrients are like particularly evenly distributed, then the pattern of usage is going to be pretty even too.
Yes, exactly. And this is really also very interesting because when the mushroom circle happens, when this fairy ring happens, basically the like middle part of the circle will wither off and die again because these nutrients have been sucked up by the mycelium. And this really feeds into the folklore that there is something like otherworldly happening inside this fairy ring because now you have like, very verdant landscape, right? And then you see this fairy ring, and then inside the fairy ring, it's like withered or decayed and dying.
Yeah, no, that 100% feels like a portal to another world, and maybe the video game Portal.
Exactly. It's also worth noting that not all species of mushrooms create fairy rings. There's about 60 or so different species that grow in this method. And most notably, at least when we're talking about folklore, is the Amanita muscaria, or the fly agaric, which is probably the most like identifiable mushroom in the world. It's the red one with the white spots.
Okay, great. Just like in Stardew Valley. Excellent.
Exactly. And we're going to talk a lot about the fly agaric later, but don't worry about it. But like when you picture a mushroom from like art and stuff, it is probably that one.
Honestly, Julia, it's one of those things where I kind of half assume that it's fake and just like a thing we've all decided because it is cartoon. It is like the Smurfs. Like I see a picture of an actual mushroom that has like a bright red cap and white round spots. And I'm just like, oh, that must be a drawing.
Oh, Amanda, we're going to talk about Smurfs later. Don't worry.
Hell yeah.
All right, let's get into the folklore of the fairy ring. As I mentioned before, the fairy ring can occur pretty much wherever mushrooms grow. So the folklore surrounding them is pretty global. Europe has probably some of the most well-known of these traditions. There is a lot of variety from culture to culture. And again, it is probably the situation where this is a Western bias where these just happen to be the most documented as opposed to like they just have the most, Mm-hmm. So there are several folklore traditions that claim that fairy rings are the result of fairies or fae dancing. So the English, Celts, Scandinavians, they all make a connection to the idea of like dancing elves or fairies as the phenomenon that creates the fairy ring.
Kind of ring around the rosy situation.
Exactly. Or like in some ways, the wild hunt that we've talked about in the past, this idea of like unseeable creatures creating a sort of physical imprint on the world.
Totally.
There is a British folklorist named Thomas Kitely who claimed that while entering a fairy ring would allow a mortal to see the elves that dance there, it would put them under the elves' thrall, which obviously made it an unsafe practice that was not worth the risk.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense and explains why my instinct is don't breach the fairy ring.
Amanda, according to almost all of these traditions, your instinct is correct.
Love it.
So the majority of these myths that feature fairy rings further expand on the fact that not only do fairies and elves dance in circles, but so do witches, which is something that was perpetuated by Victorian folklorists who claimed that witches would dance in the moonlight, invisible to mortals, only for the circles to appear the following morning.
Yeah, that tracks for Victorian fears about women and witches. They'll be naked and dancing and going in, I don't know, supernatural shapes like circles.
My favorite part is like, they'll be naked, but they're like, but they'll also be invisible. So I'm like, so who cares? Who cares?
Yeah, I don't know.
One of my favorite local variations is a Scottish story, which claimed that the fairies would actually sit on the mushrooms and use them as dinner tables, which I think is adorable because it's like a little fairy restaurant.
That's so cute.
Isn't that so cute?
That's amazing. That would be, I'm trying to think if I use like a stump or something. I guess when camping, you can like use a stump as like a little table. But God, that's so cute.
Yeah, it's adorable. It's adorable. There's also a more modern variation from Wales, which claimed that the fairy rings were not the result of dancing at all, but rather marked where an underground fairy village could be found and needed to be avoided as to not upset them.
That feels very Welsh, just based on vibes of like, you know what, that's where they're doing their thing, and we are going to accommodate them and leave them alone.
Yes, and we see that a lot with, like, we talked about that in the Fae episode, where it's like, if you know that the Fae hang out there, don't disturb it. Like, you have those stories out of, like, Iceland and stuff like that being like, yeah, we had to build a highway around this big hill because that's a fairy hill and we don't fuck with that.
When in doubt, that's the safe option, in my opinion.
Exactly. There are people, as you'll see in a little bit, Amanda, who do not follow that safe option.
Listen, if they didn't make bad choices, it would be harder for us to make content. But still, I'm like, oh no.
So as you can kind of tell from the variety of these traditions, fairy rings were not exactly something to be trifled with. And it was best to avoid them entirely rather than cross them. So these were supposed to be like these sacred spaces. And if not sacred, they were at least the domain of fairies. So to cross them was to kind of violate the property of the fairies. And as we know from studying folklore all of these years, Amanda, violating hospitality in mythology is never a good thing.
No, that's like rule number one that you don't want to break. And I imagine that even if you're out there foraging, even if you're, finding food to eat or food to sell, at a certain point, it makes sense not to piss off your supernatural neighbors.
Correct. Because to be an interloper in a fairy circle would lead to curses, misfortune, general bad vibes,
Makes sense.
There is an Irish tale, Amanda, which tells of a farmer who, despite the warnings of his neighbors, decides that he's going to build his barn and in doing so, disturb a fairy ring.
It's always going to be one.
Always going to be one guy. How else would we know, if not for the one person who fucked up?
I got to know what happened to him.
All right. So he awakens the following night after starting to build his barn and disturbing the fairy ring. He has lost all of his senses.
Oh.
He can't see, he can't hear, he can't smell, he can't touch, and what's the last one I'm forgetting?
Taste.
Taste? He can't taste anything.
Sucks. Wow.
Yeah, it's not great. So it requires someone to come in and basically break the curse on him, which he then has this dream where he's like, I've got to destroy the barn. And so he goes out and he destroys the barn, and he is no longer afflicted with any curse or bad vibes or anything like that.
Incredible. And God, what an Irish tale that I am not qualified to get into, but I sure can speculate about tearing down your own overreach in order not to stand out.
Yes, that feels right. Feels right. It feels like when we talked about leprechaun stories and stuff, you're like, yeah, that's kind of the vibe. I get it.
If you want to not be damaged by fate, why would you get all that gold?
Yeah, exactly. To be fair, this Irish farmer kind of got off easily because there are worse, more mythological consequences mentioned for entering a fairy ring as well. I mentioned before that one can be enthralled by the dancing of seeing elves within a fairy ring. But some stories will tell you that if you enter one, you become invisible to mortals outside and become trapped there.
That is a terrible fate. What effective warnings.
If you were to come across the Fae while within a fairy ring, they might enchant you to dance to the point of exhaustion, madness, or even death.
Sure.
And it was supposedly more dangerous on certain days. So, for example, in England, Wales, Scotland, and Ireland, Halloween and May Eve were quoted to be the most dangerous times for mortals when it comes to fairy rings.
That makes sense to me. It's also spring and fall. I'm sure the growing and dying back is really going off at that time. Makes a ton of sense to me.
Now, Amanda, not all is lost if you do become trapped within a fairy ring, because there are ways of getting you out, but they do require outside assistance.
But if you're invisible, hard to do.
Exactly. Hard to do. You have to assume maybe someone can hear you or something beyond it if you're not enthralled to dance or sing or whatever.
Yeah.
But if you were trapped in a fairy ring in Wales, it is said that marjoram and thyme spread around a fairy circle could disorient them, freeing the mortal and allowing him to escape. Also, touching a bit of iron was said to free the mind of a mortal who was under the thrall of the Fae.
There you go. Iron is going to come through and break all kinds of curses.
Yeah, so I guess if you're like worried that your friend might be caught in a fairy circle, you can't see them, you can't hear them, you just grab like an iron bar and just kind of wave it in front of the fairy circle, being like, you good in there?
Yeah.
Is everything okay?
Carry a little iron token or coin in your pocket, you know, the very common iron coin, and just kind of like chuck it in the middle of the circle and see if that helps.
Yeah. However, if there's nothing there, you're kind of out of a coin after you throw it in there, because you got to at least wait for the fairy ring to die off.
Yeah, no, you can't take it back. You can't take it back.
There is a great Scottish poem that talks about what happens if you attempt to destroy or cross a fairy ring. I'm not going to attempt to read this in like a Scottish accent, or it's written in an accent, but I will attempt my best to just read it straight for you.
Got it.
He what tills the fairies green, nigh luck again shall have, and he what spills the fairies ring, betide him want and way. For weirdless days and weary nights are his till his dying day. But he what goes by the fairy ring, ne dool nor pine shall see, and he what cleans the fairy ring, an easy death shall dee.
Okay, so if you want to, you know, shuffle off the mortal coil in a really nice way, take care of those fairy rings.
Yeah, I mean, real quick death, apparently.
Oh, I thought it was saying, like, don't till it and don't cross it, but do take care of it, like clean it. Or do you think it means, like, clear away and then you're just going to die immediately?
I'm not entirely sure. It's definitely saying, like, don't till it, don't really touch it, don't, like, you know, get yourself involved with it. Scottish listeners, weigh in. Let us know.
I'd love to know.
So I've been focusing a lot about the fairy ring lore of like England, Ireland, Wales, and Scotland, because those are probably the most well documented here in the West, like I mentioned. But there are a couple of other areas that have fairy ring lore. Germans believed that fairy rings were caused by witches dancing on Walpurgis night.
Cool.
In Austria, fairy rings were caused by the fiery tails of dragons. And it was said that once a dragon created a circle, only mushrooms would grow there for 7 years.
Okay, all right. I'm liking that. I'm liking the dragon. I'm liking the number 7. That makes a ton of sense. And I'm sure also because the mycelium is drawing in so many nutrients, it's not like a tree or grasses are going to like pop up in the middle of that. Like it's clearly the soil's been depleted.
Yeah, you often will get fairy rings around dying trees as well. And those are very longer living than, say, like a meadow fairy ring, because there are a lot more nutrients to get out of a decaying tree.
Oh, totally.
The French believed that fairy rings were guarded by giant toads who would curse those who passed through the circle.
Okay.
I love that.
I mean, big toadstools. They're little footstools for toads, presumably.
In the Philippines, fairy rings are associated with the duende, who are these sort of like nature spirits that resemble small old men.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the Dutch believed that the circle of the fairy ring was left where the devil would churn his milk at night. And Amanda, I was like, why the fuck is the devil churning milk? Apparently, it has something to do with misogyny and how women typically did the hard work of milking cows and then churning butter. And the only possible way that she could have done this and made money off of it was by working with the devil in exchange for her milk fortune.
That is such a journey. And I was immediately going to say, like, have you ever churned butter? It's fucking hard. It takes forever.
It is.
And like, absolute shout out to everyone churning the butter out there. But damn, I didn't know that like women profiting under capitalism have to be a result of the devil's interference. But
apparently. I have a wild article that I got that from that I will link to our patrons in the show notes, because it's truly, I was like, what is happening here? I distilled that down from like 8 paragraphs about like women and butter and the like culture around it.
Thank you so much. You know, I was going to ask, Julia, what's the devil doing turning some butter?
Don't worry. Yeah. I got you. Because I asked that same question. I was like, I need to have an answer for that. So that is what I have on fairy rings, but there are other mushroom folklore stories out there that I am excited to tell you about. So why don't we do that as soon as we get back from our refill?
Let's do it. Hello, everybody. It's me, Amanda. Welcome to The Refill, where I am delighted that Gemini has hailed my call. listened to me, and they have come on through and they have become a patron. So thank you so much, Gemini. You have also become an annual patron. And so, like I suggested, for the cost of like a mid-tier pair of jeans, you have become a Spirits patron for a full year. We are so excited to have you, and thank you very much. And if you want to be like Gemini, if you want your name to be read here in the mid-roll, if you want me to give you a really specific compliment, you should go ahead and become a patron of Spirits at patreon.com/spiritspodcast. You get recipe cards, behind the scenes notes and links, and all kinds of other extras, including, for example, ad-free episodes. If you're not into hearing ads on new episodes, that's cool. Just come on over to Patreon and get an ad-free. You can do all of that and more at patreon.com/spiritspodcast. Welcome and thank you to our supporting producer-level patrons, Alicia, Ann, Ariana, Ginger Spurs Boy, Hannah, Jack Marie, Jane, Measelkins, Lily, Matthew, Captain Jonathan, Malachi, Cosmos, and Sarah, and our legend-level patrons, Audra, Bex, Chibi Yokai, Jeremiah, Michael, Morgan H., Sarah, and BM Me Up Scotty. This week, I would like to recommend asking for what you want. Again, we sometimes recommend actual physical things here in the mid-roll, but this week I have had 2 instances of asking for a thing I wanted and people said yes, and I was surprised, and it made my life a lot better. One was watching Eric say to our landlord at the office, "Hey, it looks like you're losing a lot of tenants. Can you like lower our rent?" And the guy was like, "Sure." So that was great. So, you can like negotiate rent. They won't always say yes, but you can say it. And second, I, ironically for a podcaster, don't hear very well. My hearing is getting worse. And so when I went to yoga, where they like to play, music to kind of help you get into the flow of things, I said to my teacher, "Hey, don't hear so good. Can you speak up or turn the music down?" And she said, "Yeah, no problem." And you know what? Yoga's better when you can hear the instructions. And so it makes me a little worried, but if you are thinking about something right now and you're like, "Oh, shit, yeah, no, I should ask for what I want," think of me encouragingly giving you a little thumbs up real close to my face and saying, "Yeah, do it." This week at Multitude, we have incredible stuff going on. Maddie, our social media manager, has started posting weekly roundups of all of the episodes that we post and the events that we do and the newsletters that we send out every week, which it makes me feel really proud because we have a lot going on. And it makes me really happy that our small and mighty team is doing all this work, including over on Exolore. Dr. Moya McTeer is closing in on 100 episodes as she examines what life might be like on planets different from our own, how writers create our favorite fictional worlds, and just generally anything you could want to know about world building, hosted by an astrophysicist and folklorist. I never knew I needed that combo until I met Dr. McTeer, and you do too. You're going to learn and laugh and gain an appreciation for how special our planet really is. So if you're into stories, which I know you are because you're listening to this show, go on over and check Exolore out. It's exolorepod.com or search Exolore in your podcast app. This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. There is a lot, like I was saying earlier, a lot of stuff I want to say that I don't say, a lot of stuff I need to get off my chest. I've wanted to end therapy for a while now, move on to another therapist, and I found it very difficult to say that. I'm lucky that I have a great therapist who can kind of help me process that. And I'm like, hey, so it feels weird to talk about how it feels weird to tell you that I want to end therapy to you, my therapist. All of that to say that we all carry around different stressors, big and small. And when we keep them bottled up, when we shame ourselves for not doing it, when we're worrying about what we should be doing and when we're going to be doing it, and all of that time and energy spent worrying about the thing instead of doing the thing, it's really burdensome. And therapy is one place where I know that no matter what, I can talk about what's burdening me and figure out how to like work through whatever that is. And if, like me a few years ago, you needed to access therapy online, you couldn't access it near you, there's maybe not a safe way or an affordable way or people accepting new patients. If you want to access a convenient, flexible, and entirely suited to your schedule therapy option, I want you to know about BetterHelp. You can just fill out a brief questionnaire to get started and get matched with a licensed therapist. And if, like me, time comes to switch therapists, you can do that at any time for no additional charge. So get it off your chest with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/spirits today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/spirits. And now, let's get back to the show.
Amanda, we are back. And a cocktail that I've been thinking a lot about lately is one that was inspired by our conversation with Mel Gilman when they were talking about like their turkey tail kind of vodka that they had created. And I was like, I bet that would be really good with whiskey. And what if you made an old fashioned with turkey tail whiskey and also with some maple syrup and a little bit of Angostura bitters?
Incredible. I think the old fashioned is such a good drink to do like a fat washing or a savory component or a more umami component. And mushrooms are so good for that.
That was our cocktail back for the Mel Gilman episode because I was like really thinking about it. For this episode, I think you should do a mushroom reposado tequila situation and then create something like on a little bit of a smokier, more savory umami style margarita.
Absolutely incredible. You can do like a little chili simple syrup in there or a hot honey maybe. It'd be so good.
Yeah. Maybe like a tomato water situation in there as well to like really make it savory. I think that would be really good.
Incredible.
Tomatillos, perhaps. I don't know. A lot of options here. Now, Amanda, before we get into more mushroom folklore, I have a little game for us.
All right, let's do it.
This is a game that I've called What's That Mushroom Gonna Do?
Okay.
Basically, I'm going to show you a picture of a notable looking mushroom.
Yeah.
And I want you to tell me what magical effect that mushroom would have if you came across it in, let's say, a magical world or a fairy circle or something like that. I've got 5 for you today.
Let's do it, Julia. I'm ready.
I'm going to start you off with probably one of the most stunning, and by that I truly mean it is stunning, mushrooms out there in the world. This is the bleeding tooth mushroom.
Oh, okay. This looks like an otherworldly gaping maw with white flesh and extremely pearlescent, like pomegranate seed looking dots of red blood, it seems. So I'm going to go ahead and say that this mushroom would make you sprout like 100 eyes, like a biblical angel.
Ooh.
And so you will have like incredible vision and incredible ability, maybe like even X-ray, like you can kind of flip as if you're a national treasure through different kinds of vision, including seeing through things, you're seeing heat signatures, but they do weep blood at all times.
Terrifying. And I love it. No notes. We play D&D, Amanda. And so the idea of like being able to like see into like the astral plane or like see invisibility or like see stuff like that, I think is a really cool idea. I want anyone who plays tabletop RPGs at home, feel free to use these as inspiration for items in your campaign. I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, and if you're really into the, superhero mushroom powered group think aspect of all this mythology, hey, campaign 2 of Join the Party is perfect for you. I promise.
There's a lot of mushroom content in campaign 2.
And a big mushroom guy, you're going to love it.
Yeah. All right, Amanda, how about our next one here, which is the Veiled Lady?
Oh, all right. This is the kind of thing that in today's day and age, my first thought is this AI generated? And my second thought is, no, that's nature, which is incredible. So this looks almost like an upside down tulip. There is a really like lovely kind of spongy, like dried seashell looking cap to the mushroom. And then the skirt is what I got to call it, is like a beautiful, like tulip shaped veil, lacy, gorgeous skirt. I'm going to say because of the laciness and how it's see-through, it feels very airy to me. And so I'm going to say that eating this mushroom lets you fly. I know it is such a basic feature or thing, but like from a kid to now, my wildest fantasy, if I had powers, would still be to fly.
I love that idea. Can I end it for you?
Always.
How about when you eat that mushroom, you gain like wings underneath your arms, like kind of like flying squirrel wings that are made up of that veil like material.
Perfection.
Yes. Incredible. I love this. You're so good. I love putting you on the spot and you come up with creative things.
It also looks an awful lot like the animal fat that you use to do like, do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, like calling, like the idea of like you wrap certain meats and stuff in animal fat in order to bind it together.
Yeah, it looks a lot like that as well, which feels like a really good addition for the wing fabric.
All right, Amanda, how about our next one, which is one of my favorite mushrooms of all time, the turkey tail.
Oh, yeah, what Mel was talking about. So this is gorgeous. It looks honestly like a geode, like the beautiful kind of rings of color and like a turkey's tail. It's like half of a sort of ruffled circle. All right, we did flying. This reminds me a little bit of like the neck of a turkey or like the wing of a bat. Ooh, how about I think if you zoom out enough, this would look almost like in a platforming video game where you're sort of like jumping up from between ledges. And so what if this allowed you, like a goat or a sheep, to sort of like perch on ledges really well? So you can like jump and climb and sort of scale rocky surfaces a lot better than before.
Yeah, like as long as the material that you're not trying to climb on is like absolutely smooth, like a, I don't know, like a stainless steel or something like that, you're always able to find purchase.
Yeah, if there's any kind of texture to it, because the turkey tail mushroom is like fluted. It is like a wrinkled paper or something, or like linen after you wash it. It's so pretty.
I also really like the idea of like maybe as you're eating this and you're trying to climb up a space, every time you put your hand out, a turkey tail grows for you to grab onto.
1,000%.
That's really cool. I like that a lot. All right. A next one is a really stunning mushroom called the inky cap.
Yeah, this looks like a DeviantArt portrait. So this is like traditional mushroom shape, a very pure white stalk. And then the cap of the mushroom is like ombre, from like a snowy white at the peak, like a mountain, all the way down to black at the rim. And then again, what looks like a latex makeup effect of just like dripping like shiny black, almost like tendrils. So what could this be? I'm thinking something related to like sludge resistance to like poisons. Maybe you don't have to eat or drink anymore because you are fueled by like a tree ingesting pollutants and then letting out pure oxygen again. Because that play between like light and dark, between almost like goopy and pure, is really clear in this photo.
I really like the idea of maybe you just like become liquid shadow after eating this. Like the idea of like you just kind of like become a gloop, but it's also you're so dark that you can kind of blend in with the shadows.
Yeah, that's really good. And, presumably you can pop back up at some point or other. But
yes,
if you eat this mushroom, you got to expect to become a goop. You simply must.
You just gotta. Look at it. It's so goopy.
Yep.
Incredible. All right, Amanda, here's our last one. And I think you will recognize it.
Hey, so this is what I think a kid would draw if you told him to draw a mushroom with like a real kind of like bulbous red cap, some spots on it, which looking at it now do look more natural. They're not just like the matte, polka dot. They are like growth and a cartoonish thick stalk.
Yes, that is the fly agaric, which we mentioned earlier on in the episode.
Now this... maybe it's my Super Mario playing husband, but I do just want to jump on it. And so I wonder if this maybe lets you be a little buoyant. Maybe you're like gravity has only half of the hold on you that it would before. And that could present some challenges in terms of doing the things that you want to do, but also might, lift you up. Maybe, though, you have to like fart noxious gas in order to to do that.
You got to burp like it's Willy Wonka. I get you.
Yeah. I mean, it screams nature is telling me don't eat me because it's bright red.
Now, Amanda, if you had to eat one of these that we've just described with the effects and all, which one would you go for?
Oh, turkey tail, 100%.
All right.
Yeah, very cool. And I think it would let me hang out with like new kinds of birds and climb trees, which I always want to do.
All right, Amanda. Well, speaking of the fly agaric mushroom, that quintessential mushroom in all of art, let's talk about the Dutch kabouter.
All right.
So they are kind of how we understand gnomes to be in folklore. They're like the Dutch version of, let's say, like the leprechaun or the hob or the brownie. They are said to only be about 10 to 15 centimeters tall. The men of the species have long, full beards, tall, pointed hats, usually green or red. Think of the lawn gnome. That's basically what this is.
Okay, I was going to say I'm getting Smurf traditional gnome vibes for sure.
Well, the Smurfs were inspired by the kabouter.
Hey.
So they're also connected with lost objects. Basically, like if you lose something in the house or out in the field, chances are a kabouter now has it and keeps it in their home.
Makes a ton of sense to me. And I remember just like digging in my grandparents' backyard as a kid. And I mean, mostly it was just the trash that people buried before there was municipal waste on Long Island. But also that really makes me laugh, and is a trope I really love, is like the nature or forest spirits or otherwise, underground or forgotten people with like a tin can, a hammer, like, a broken scythe, like making use of all of those discarded or lost items.
Yeah, and incorporating them into their homes, which is really cute.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of their homes, Amanda, the reason we are talking about them in the first place is because they are said to live inside of mushrooms, most often fly agarics.
Sure. I mean, the fly agaric looks like there's got to be something in there. Like it looks like you would cut it open and then surprisingly it's cake inside, like that Netflix show. Like it looks like that. It really does.
So they are said to live in these mushrooms either like near houses or stables, also in forests or on heaths, basically anywhere where you could find these mushrooms, right? They're also associated with red squirrels. And this is wild. All right, get ready for me. First off, to humans, fly agaric is toxic. It's said that like no one has died from eating a fly agaric in over 100 years, but it is toxic. Like, if a child was to ingest it, they would probably die. If you decided to eat like 5 of them in one go without any sort of preparation, just like straight off the ground, you're going to die from that.
Got it.
It doesn't stop people from trying to eat it because it is psychoactive.
Ah, got it. Okay. But I mean, listen, Julia, all of my favorite substances are poisonous if I take too many.
Exactly. There are ways of eating it. I wouldn't recommend it. But the reason that I'm bringing this up is because in nature, animals such as red squirrels will actively seek out fly agaric mushrooms to eat them for the intoxication effect.
Love animals getting high on mushrooms, just like the human animals that they cohabitate with. Incredible.
We're talking about fly agaric. We're talking about red squirrels getting high. I'm sure there are several people who are listening to this who assume that I'm going to talk about the Santa fly agaric theory.
Excuse me?
Basically, it's this idea that Santa originated as a Sami spiritual leader who would give these mushrooms to village elders, that they would then take them as part of ceremonies, right? Like religious ceremonies. Reindeer, much like red squirrels, as I mentioned, would notably eat these mushrooms for the hallucinogenic effects as well.
Okay, sure.
So Santa supposedly became associated with like the red and white of the mushroom, the prancing, aka flying high reindeer, etc., etc.
Okay.
Now, I'm mentioning this because it was a theory that became very popularized, especially like starting in the 50s, became more popularized recently, like on the internet. Like there are articles out there that people are like writing about it, being like, Santa is associated with hallucinogenic mushrooms.
When it fits that well into a clickbaity headline, I'm very suspicious.
It's been incredibly debunked at this point. Basically, this is all like the theorizing of an anthropologist from the 50s who did not have enough sources to actually justify his theory on this matter. There is some truth to this in terms of like the Sami would and sometimes still do use reindeer urine to reduce the toxicity of the mushrooms, which allows them to use the hallucinogenic properties in religious practices, but it doesn't tie to the theory of Santa Claus.
That makes all the sense in the world. And I think is one of the modern forms of syncretism where we're like, actually, this ultimately is about Santa or Jesus.
And lol, it's not pagan. It's fine, actually.
Yeah. I was recently in the Arctic Circle and was able to go to a museum of Sami culture and also to eat reindeer. So that was really fun. And thank you, Sami.
Did you like it?
The reindeer was similar to venison. It was a little like gamey. Okay. I wouldn't like seek it out, but I wanted to, have the experience.
Have the experience. That's good. That's good. I like that. All right. So we've spent a lot of time in Europe. We talked about the Philippines briefly, but let's talk about South America.
Hell yeah.
How about we talk about the Cayeri, which are creatures from the folklore out of Colombia and Venezuela. They are somewhat humanoid, but also plant-like. Their description kind of varies from source to source, but most notably, they have a large mushroom-like either hat or growth coming out of the top of their head.
Okay, talk about mountainous and humid places. That sounds like makes all the sense in the world.
Well, that's very important, Amanda, because it is said that when it rains, they appear. So they're mostly sighted during the rainy season, but they supposedly prefer to stay underground during the drier seasons.
Makes a lot of sense.
They are said to be strong and fast, and like pretty much they love to eat cows. So they are like strong and fast enough to scoop up a cow and then run away with it in a blink.
No kidding. That's got to be very strong and very fast because cows are very big.
In my mind, they have kind of a cute appearance. You can look up some like photos of them and stuff like that. They look cute in my mind, at least. They are definitely a malicious creature.
Sure.
They will kidnap, they will rob, they will murder when they emerge for the season. A little sad, but it's okay. As such, hunters had to find a way to kill them so they didn't like, decimate all their livestock or like,
Dude, cows are expensive. Yeah.
Very expensive cows. And also your family members, expensive in an emotional way. So in order to kind of figure out a way to kill them, they found that only a bone-tipped arrow shot into the kidney will kill them.
Okay.
And when they die, they turn into a stone.
Ah, I like that.
Not like a stone statue of the creature either, just like they turned into like a rock, a pebble.
A pebble or like a boulder?
No, like a pebble.
Oh no. What a sad death.
There's a story of like a hunter where a coyote steals his daughter or something like that. So he and his son go looking for it and he manages to kill it and it like dies and immediately turns into a pebble that falls into the river.
Oh.
And then there's like he hears like the rest of the coyote like coming out and they apparently all the coyote can say is moo, like moo, moo, moo. And so he's like, he fell out of a tree and broke his back. It wasn't my fault. Okay, bye. And then ran home. It was safe.
Damn. Okay.
They're also associated with the appearance of anthills, especially during the rainy season. And of course, fairy rings.
Sure. And I think the aspect of mushrooms that most freaks me out is like it's as if there was a fruit tree, but then only the fruit emerged above the ground. Like the whole infrastructure and system of the organism is beneath the surface. So it makes total sense that things like anthills, where they, the rest is obscured and they are only the top side evidence of all this activity going on behind the scenes. I think that's really creepy and cool, and I like that they're together.
Have you ever seen those videos of like scientists pouring basically like molten metal into anthills to study their shape? And like oh my God, it's incredible because all of a sudden like you see them digging it out. You're like, you see a normal size kind of anthill or like, a larger size anthills in the middle of a desert or something like that. They pour this molten metal in and then they have to dig it out. And it's like huge, like just like from radius and diameter perspective. And they like pull it out and it's ginormous. It's so freaking cool. Look that up if you get a chance to, because it's honestly so cool.
I'm going to think about whether I want to know how large anthills are under the ground.
It's only a specific species, if that's helpful, and not one that's native to America, or at least not where we live.
That helps.
All right. And speaking of these kind of like networks of mushrooms and ants and stuff like that, it is said that all mushrooms in the forest are connected to, or at least are aspects of the coyote. Which is, again, like they probably didn't know about the mycelium network or anything like that. They didn't know about the root systems in which like all mushrooms are kind of connected through. And the fact that they understand that and that is part of the mythos is so freaking cool.
The more we learn about organisms, about, coral and mushrooms and other like rhizomatic plants and how old they are, how connected they are, the more I'm just like, damn, the nature's incredible.
Yeah, it really is. All right, so the last one that I want to mention before we call it on this episode of Mushroom Month is the feng, which is from Chinese folklore and is kind of associated with the lingzhi or the reishi mushroom. If you don't know what a reishi or a lingzhi mushroom is, there's sort of these like cat mushrooms, have a fan-like appearance. They sort of look like turkey tails, but are all like one color. And they're a very popular mushroom for traditional Chinese medicine. Usually they're dried, pulverized, and then added to boiling water to make like an extract, right?
Mm-hmm.
So from like the beginning of Taoism and the creation of like Taoist temples, they were sometimes referred to as the abode of mushrooms because the lingzhi or spirit mushroom was utilized in religious practices that allowed them to utilize the hallucinogenic properties in order to see or become spirits.
Wow.
Which I think is really cool, really interesting. I love how many cultures are like, we found some mushrooms. They have cool and interesting properties that allow us to see stuff that may or may not be there. And we're going to use it in our religion now.
Yeah, we've talked about it all the time, whether it's, meditation, fasting, substances that, alter the brain, or just like chanting ritual and almost creating that like heightened spiritual state. We want to connect with stuff that's bigger, and nothing does that like, again, whether you're, thinking about your life after fasting for 25 hours on Yom Kippur, or you're, ingesting a holy substance to think more about it. It just, I don't know how you can't see all those things as like ultimately part of the same impulse and tradition.
Absolutely. 100%. These mushrooms were extremely religiously important. They were said to bring immortality to those who took it. They were even considered like tied to the divine. So the healing of the goddess Guan Yin was portrayed as being done with a lingji mushroom or with her holding one, which I think is like incredibly important, being like, this stuff will cure you.
That's amazing, and presumably still used today.
Yes. You can definitely like find a lingji mushroom or reishi mushroom like teas or dried or like powdered substances that you can enjoy there. Yeah, not to the point where you're getting the hallucinogenic properties,
sure,
but there are like definitely like health food places that you can enjoy these kind of extracts from. But getting back to the feng is this kind of like incredible edible monster that was known as the meat lingji mushroom.
That's incredible. I don't think I've ever heard the phrase edible monster before, but it's opening up all kinds of possibilities in my brain.
Okay, so basically it's kind of like this two-eyed lump of meat that was said to magically grow back its flesh as quickly as it was eaten. It was described as, quote, "It is a mass of flesh which looks like the liver of an ox. It has two eyes. Even though you eat it, it is never really consumed because it grows again and is born again in the same form as it was before."
Okay, I take it back. I never want to hear the phrase edible monster again. That's incredibly creepy, and I love it.
So I really love this idea of this creature that is constantly regenerating. Because it's much like a mushroom. The idea that if you like plucked a mushroom, because of the mycelial network, it can still like come back and grow back and stuff like that. It's really interesting. It's really cool. I love the connection between these two. And while the first references to this creature were from around 2,000 years ago, it's coming back in terms of like popularity in China.
Really? I mean, I understand that any society interested in the project of like keeping people fed without completely depleting their land, maybe that's of interest?
Yes. And I think also just like the interest of the internet and also the kind of cryptozoology, sightings of cryptids, stuff like that. This was kind of the Chinese media getting in on that version of it. Basically, they started reporting these fang followings. It started in like the late 1900s, but the most well-known version of the fang in modern attention was from 2012. If you've heard this name before, this is probably the story that you know it from. Someone claimed to have found a fang that was being like kept in a bucket of water in the countryside of China.
Sure.
A news team went out to investigate the claims. A reporter went there. He handled the monster. There's a video of him handling it. He's like, oh, it's quite fleshy. There's a mouth and a nose. But the video ended up going viral internationally and somewhat unintentionally because it was discovered that it was not a fang at all. But I don't know how to say this without... I'm just going to say it. It was a fleshlight. If you don't know what a fleshlight is, don't Google that. Please don't do that. But as such, the fang, very much in the public consciousness again in China and internationally.
It's very troubling. I thought for sure you were going to say it's like a sea sponge, a microbe, a fungus.
No.
Nope.
Yeah, it was the other thing.
Okay. Well, people all over the world have needs and desires, and that's wonderful.
That's true. That is very true. So there's definitely some mushroom folklore out there in the world.
What a note to end on.
What a note to end on, right? I'll admit there wasn't as much mushroom creatures as I was expecting, like I mentioned before, but we've got lots to talk about in future episodes about mushrooms, how they've kind of permeated culture today, and specifically how they permeated modern horror as a theme. And like I said, I think we'll have a special guest of ours coming on to talk about just that thing in the future, near future.
Can't wait. What a fun thing. And I'm really glad we have this foundation of all of the existing mushroom folklore you could find before we dive into some contemporary and digital and maybe like theoretical versions of mushroom folklore.
There we go. And in the meantime, the next time you come across a fairy ring, remember, stay creepy.
Stay cool. And don't step on it, okay? Don't
do it.